My name is Jim White. I came to New York in 1979 without a job, without friends, and without a home. I was a wild and crazy 27-year-old. I had never had the wild time that most young men experience much earlier in life. I was always practicing the piano, trying to make up for lost time spent in a small country town in Florida with no access to great teachers. I think that I secretly thought that the piano could be my ticket out of Central Florida, where I did not belong except by right of birth. I arrived in New York by way of Atlanta, where I spent 9 months waiting tables and coming out as a gay man, but I needed more. Atlanta could not contain me. New York was another world. I arrived in May when the days were crisp and cool. The skyscrapers were etched in silver against an impossibly blue sky. There were people everywhere going quickly about their lives, on a mission, with purpose. These were my new anonymous friends. Where were they going? Where did they work? How did they live? I wanted to know everything. There were so many of them, the smartly dressed alongside the homeless. I wanted to be part of this swirling mass. Surely there was a place for me. I took long walks from one end of the city to the other, enthralled with so many different neighborhoods, so many different styles of architecture. I felt a sense of homecoming to all my memories of the movies, the magazines, and the songs about this magical place. And now I was here. I was intoxicated by the music, dance, and museums. I had to know the meaning of abstract expressionism and bought a book, heavy and deep and abstract. In 1979, everyone was going out, getting high, and having sex. Everyone who was anyone was in New York, and it was time to party. It was a time when you could run into Jackie O, as I did on her way in to catch a movie. At night, it was a time of Andy Warhol, Liza Minnelli, and Halston doing way too much cocaine. Truman Capote doing way too much of everything, and Diana Ross doing her goddess. Any or all of them could be dancing the night away with shirtless gay men, Park Avenue matrons, famous politicians, and other wealthy and beautiful people from all over the world. New York was the center of the world at that time. It didn't matter that the city was still recovering from the financial crisis of 1974. It didn't matter that the city was filthy, crime-ridden, and that working people had to take a decrepit, dirty subway with no air conditioning every single day. Everyone, it seemed, was living for the weekend. You could feel the electricity and sexuality in the air, and the possibility of going home with someone new every single night. It didn't matter that I knew nothing about the drugs that everyone was taking. A few years later, I would develop a thorough knowledge of the subject and have my very own PDR, physician's desk reference, in case you don't know. To be young, gay, and beautiful was your ticket to all things glamorous in New York. I got a job waiting tables at Smith & Walensky's. I was not prepared for the demanding clients, the tough bosses, and how fast you had to work at lunch to accommodate the business expense account people. My heart was not in it, and neither was my memory. How could I possibly remember who had the lemon or the lime, the chicken or the steak? The server would look at me for instruction, and after a pregnant pause with the whole table looking at me, I would make a wild guess and hope for the best. My best got me fired a few weeks later. New York was starting to show me its very tough side, and I was beginning to run out of money. I interviewed with advertising agencies hoping to get an entry-level job in media planning, and in desperation, I contacted headhunters for banking, which was just the pits. I finally got an offer of $10,000 annually from an advertising firm and an offer of $22,000 from a bank. I hated the idea of going back to banking, but I didn't know how I could survive on $10,000 even in 1979. I was later to learn that media planners had rich parents to support them until they were promoted to account executive. In those days, East 53rd, between 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Avenue, was a gay, cruise, and hustler zone. There were lots of seedy bars with names like Cowboys and Cowgirls, but the most upmarket was called Rounds. It had a restaurant on one side and a bar on the other, divided by a long wall where attractive young men stood in search of a hookup. Others were looking to sell themselves to the wealthy older clientele. At the far end, both sides merged into a piano bar, where it was said Vladimir Horowitz occasionally sat down to play. So it had an air of class and camp. Those days it was easy to talk to complete strangers, and one night I fell into a conversation with a nice young man, not terribly attractive, who was a typical New Yorker, bright, well-read, and humorous, who took an interest in me, the obvious newcomer. David happened to be in the management training program at Manufacturers Hanover Bank, aka Manny Hanny. He was very pragmatic and right away told me that I could not pay rent or feed myself on $10,000 a year and told me to take the bank offer. There was to be no discussion. David took a liking to me and invited me to sleep on his sofa in his apartment down in the Village. He was such a New York character, and when I heard that he had a small terrace, there was nothing I could do but accept his invitation. It had to be better than my existing room at the YMCA. Those were the days when management trainees could double up with a roommate and get a top floor apartment in the center Village with views and a terrace. Amazing, isn't it? David already had a roommate, so my sofa was free of charge. We spent a couple of early summer weeks talking about books. It was the first time I had ever heard of Christopher Isherwood. We ate in diners and going to Julius, which was and still is the oldest gay bar in the city. Julius was a seedy, smoky place with sawdust on the floor, with two big windows facing directly onto the street, no hiding here, and a wonderful mix of gay men full of conversation and sometimes looking to hook up for the night. It was during those weeks that I realized David was right, and so I took the job at the bank that was to start in 3 or 4 weeks. I had feelings of defeat and a sad resignation of the importance of survival, but there was no turning back for me. It was better to survive in New York than anywhere else. One night I went back to Rounds. As I approached the piano, an attractive man of about 30 locked onto me with very intense, see-through-me eyes. He was well-dressed and rather dashing. As we started talking, I soon realized he was very intelligent and very sophisticated. Mario was an artist and had designed a line of very expensive jewelry for which he was in contract negotiations with a major retailer. He seemed very nice, and we went back to his place in Turtle Bay Towers. The next morning, he showed me some of the jewelry, which to me seemed beautifully designed. He had just returned from Monte Carlo, where he custom-made pieces for all his friends who used to hang out at the beach club. He was in New York to nail down the contract that was to bring him lots and lots of money. At the moment, he was living off his attorney, Salvatore, who was an investor and former lover. Mario claimed to have graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, as it is and was known, and that he was an Italian count, Count Mario Frinelli. I should have run away as fast as I could. But no, I believed it all. He was too fascinating and glamorous, and most importantly, he had air conditioning. It was the dead of summer. We spent a few wonderful days in cool comfort. Over conversations about art and beauty and such, we decided to find an apartment together. He had to leave Turtle Bay because his attorney Sal would not continue paying the rent until the contract was finalized. I went back to David in the Village and told him of my decision. "You're crazy," he said. "You don't know anything about him at all, And I don't believe all this bullshit about him being a count. I was not to be persuaded. I had to grab the glam life. We moved into a rental near Gramercy Park that we couldn't afford. Or rather that I couldn't afford, since the count had no money. I sent for my business suits from storage in Atlanta. Even though they were all tan and polyester, the count did his best not to make snide remarks, and to his credit, went to the tailors with me in an effort to make them a little more New York. It was hopeless. I started work and felt like a misfit. Everyone was dressed in their navy or gray suits, and there I was in tan. I went to big meetings with 20 to 30 bankers sitting around a table. At the first meeting that I attended with my supervisor, one of the attorneys asked where I was from because of my suit. My supervisor stood up for me and said I was from Florida and I knew a lot about problem loans. That may have been true in Florida, but in New York, I knew absolutely nothing about these large, complicated proceedings where so many people jockeyed for position in order to carve up the dead carcass of a failed company to their advantage. Growing up, I remember that my father always told me, you have to fake it till you make it. Well, I never faked so hard in my life. I faked that I knew what was going on in the meetings, and I faked that I was straight, which was by far the most difficult. Back then, no one was out except hairdressers and people in fashion. Everyone else was in the closet with the door slammed shut. I was not prepared for how stressful this would be over many years. If you were found out, you would not be executed by a firing line, but you would be fired and your name seriously tarnished for further work. It was the polar opposite of nightlife in the city. The Count and I tried to establish a routine. I went to work and he cooked dinner. He was astonished and appalled to learn that my parents did not know I was gay. He would say, how can you not tell your parents something that is so profound and that figures into your life in such a major way? His mother had known that he was gay from an early age. She had also recognized him as a gifted artist. I would soon learn that an Italian son could do no wrong for an Italian mother, especially a count who had learned to travel in fashionable circles in New York, Palm Beach, and Monte Carlo. He convinced me that I should come out to my parents. His grandmother was ill, and his mother wanted him to come home to Fort Lauderdale for a visit. At that time, my parents were living on Key Biscayne near Miami because my father, a few years earlier, had accepted the position of president for a bank headquartered in Miami. I had visited them many times while I was still working at the bank in Tallahassee. I thought Key Biscayne was a paradise compared with our hometown of Haines City, which was located in the scrub of Central Florida. On my visits to Key Biscayne, I remember walking down the beach and being turned on by the bronzed, muscular boys in Speedos. This was the moment that I finally started to admit to myself that I was gay. At the same time, my parents seemed to be loosening up on the life and becoming somewhat more sophisticated, or so I thought. My father had softened over the years with his steady success and was so unlike the tyrant that he could be when I was a child, when he had a fierce, dogmatic determination, and my mother was the dutiful wife. In Key Biscayne, they seemed to be renewed. I had always loved them and felt more and more at ease in being with them. At this moment, I'd like the camera to be turned off because I carried on in the apartment that we couldn't afford. He hated feeling like a housewife with nothing to do but cook dinner. I was more concerned with work and just making it through the day. I told him to get a job. He said that that would look bad for the negotiations if the company thought he needed the money. He had spun a story that he had been very successful selling his jewelry privately. When my money ran out, we stayed an extra month without notifying the landlord. I moved out all at once in the middle of the night, hoping the landlord would not sue me for the rest of the lease. A friend of Mario's was not using his apartment on 43rd and 10th Avenue for a month or two, and allowed us to stay there with the proviso that Mario would paint a large canvas for the living room wall. Mario had designed the rest of the apartment on his friend's limited budget, and I must say it wasn't bad. It was December the 1st, the holidays. These were the days when 42nd Street was filled with sex shops, peep shows, pimps, and whores, and drugged out men with guns. It was very dangerous, especially the final block to our apartment. Every night after work, I would take the cattle car subway and hold my heart in my hand as I negotiated the way home. One day, Mario brought home a cassette tape of a reading that had been done especially for him by a guru who channeled energy from the other side. He would not play it for me. He said it was private and that he needed it to help him through this difficult time. He was having trouble with our relationship. Before me, he was used to having sex with lots of types of people and needed this to stimulate his artistic instincts. He said, "Jim, people used to suck me off in a crowded subway as I was hanging onto the straps. I need sex in strange places." Then he told me that I should also get a reading because of all my obvious problems. The reader's name was Frederick von Mierda. Not his real name, but close. Very close. Mario had told Freddie all about me. All I needed to do was pick up the phone and order it for $400. As I arrived at Frederick's East Side apartment, he was there, standing in the door. Freddie, as he was known, was an attractive, handsome young man with perfect features and piercing blue eyes. "Dear child, come in," he said. The apartment was beautifully decorated with bleached white floors, understated modern furniture, and flowers. "I designed it all," he said. "It's all part of the creative spirit and comes from the ether, as does everything in this life. You see, dear one, before this I was a Ford model, and I worked all over the world," as he pointed to some photos. "But I gave all that up to experiment in another direction by using my creative talent to decorate homes, and of course drawing on the ether. If you remember nothing else, remember the ether, child. Never, never forget this." He paused, then continued. "You see, I was wildly successful in everything I tried. Wildly, I tell you. Child, you will look around you and think that I have talent, that I designed all that you see. And so I did. But I was simply calling on the ether. But alas, I realized that I could help others by channeling their energy from the other side. You see, dear one, everything that we see in this life first existed in the realm of the invisible. Let's say I want to design a chair. First, I must see it present, already made. And in fact, it has already been made, because everything in existence is already there in the invisible. All that we have to do is tap this force. It is there for you too, dear child. But now there are so many souls out there who need me. They are all lost, I tell you, and in need of guidance. I feel such a responsibility. It can be such a weight, but I must not let it drag me down. Now, child, do you have a check for me? Thank you. Now take this tape and listen to it over and over. Let it come into you slowly, slowly. You have many hardships coming up, dear one. You are like a child, without experience, without tools. But you must learn this other way. Now go. You can call me if necessary, but it should not be so. Remember, there are many lost ones, and my time is strained. Please, please, please remember the ether. Now go. Do not be afraid, dear child. It was shortly after this encounter that Mario said we should split up. I asked where I was to go. He had no idea. It was up to me to find a place. We had to be out by the end of the month, which was New Year's Eve. The last thing he said was, "Jim, the one thing I know for certain is that you were never meant to be a banker." Christmas Day came and Her Majesty had a few more things to get out of the apartment. I left and went for a walk in the park. It was a cold, gray December day. I sat down on a bench and looked at the barren trees and the skyline off in the distance. What do you tell yourself at a moment like this? Everyone had deserted me. All my values and morals had been torn away. I had nothing to lean on for support. Everything I had been taught as a child to guide me through life, I saw was a sham. It was as if I was looking at the world upside down. I realized that there was no meaning in anything. No meaning in life, no meaning in what anyone said, no meaning in anything except survival. And for that I had my job, and I had my freedom. I never realized the price one had to pay for a little freedom. I finally found a little studio in a forlorn little building on East 60th Street. It was on the first floor in the back with views of a big parking lot and the exit ramp at the Queensboro Bridge. The cars would rumble down the ramp and the whole apartment seemed to shake. It was a bitterly cold winter and there wasn't enough heat. I quickly learned that I was not to ask the super for anything. He was an angry alcoholic with a mousy, beaten down wife. If I said anything, he would start hurling gay insults and threaten to have me evicted for all of my sexual perversity and activities in the building. I moved my bed into the nook in the kitchen, which was a little warmer and where there was not as much noise. I made my peace with the place as best I could. It was a struggle to make ends meet. I hated my job at the bank, but I could afford paperback books if I had soup and cereal for dinner. Better still, I had my freedom and my rapture with my new city. One lonely Saturday night, I called Frederick to see if I could come over and talk. "Yes, child, come over. We are all going to Studio 54. I arrived at his door and he told me to wait in the living room while he finished his meditation. A little later, another attractive man showed up, and as he was being directed into the living room, the phone rang. "Freddie here," he said. "Oh, hello, Muffy. Why, yes, dear. Of course. Yes, of course you're having a crisis. I will come up first thing on Tuesday." "What? You want me to come all the way up Part to see you tonight?" "Muff, I would simply love to, but you see I have friends here and we are going to studio." Yes, I know it's serious, dear. Yes, he rolls his eyes. "Very well then, we will have a consultation at studio. Meet me at my usual place, downstairs by the sofas at 2 o'clock. Yes, I can tell you for sure that everything will be all right." He put the phone down, turned toward us and said, Now you see children, everyone has problems, so many problems. That was a wealthy old woman who lives on Park Avenue, but she simply cannot connect to the invisible. I have known her since I was a child. It doesn't matter that she has all this money. She is another lonely soul going to studio for company. She loves studio. You can see there's absolutely no rest for me. I have people hanging from my every limb. I say to myself, Freddie, you must cut back. But it is impossible. How can I do so with so many needy, sad people out there? He shakes his head. I'm going to dress and then we are off. We climbed into the cab and Freddie instructed the driver to take us to 53rd between 8th and Broadway. I said, Freddie, don't you mean 54th as in Studio 54? No, child, 53rd Street. We used the back door. The back door, I wondered. We pulled up to the curb on a deserted street except for a solitary light bulb hanging from the wall of a dirty building with a solitary man standing in front of the door. We got out, and as we approached, the man said, "Hi, Freddie, good to see you again." He opened the door, and suddenly, we were on the dance floor, where the party was in full gear. Freddie turned to us and said, "Now, children, go off and play. Mother has work to do." And with the flick of a wrist, he was gone.